My husband thought he could do better until my million-dollar truth exposed him publicly. I am Nora, 34 years old, and I'm standing in the middle of an empty living room in Austin, Texas. The furniture is gone, the pictures are off the walls, and on my left ring finger there is still a faint tan line where my wedding band used to be. My husband looked me in the eyes 3 days ago and told me I was the biggest mistake of his life. Funny thing is, he had no idea who he was really married to. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from today. Drop your city in the comments below. And if you have ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better, hit that like button right now. Subscribe if you are new here and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Now let me take you back to where it all began so you can understand how a man who thought he married beneath him ended up losing everything in front of the whole world. Growing up in Marble Falls, Texas, about an hour outside of Austin, I never imagined my life would turn out the way it did. My father, a plumber named Robert, spent his days crawling under houses and fixing pipes for families who could barely afford to pay him. My mother, Linda, worked as a nurse at the local clinic, coming home with sore feet and stories about patients who reminded her why she chose that profession. We were not rich. We were not poor. We were somewhere in the middle, the kind of family that clipped coupons and drove used cars and considered a trip to the coast a luxury vacation. I had one sibling, an older brother named Marcus, who was 6 years ahead of me in everything. By the time I was learning to ride a bike, he was already getting his driver's license. By the time I started high school, he was finishing college. We were close despite the age gap, mostly because Marcus never treated me like a little kid. He talked to me about real things, about dreams and disappointments and the way the world actually worked. From a young age, I was drawn to technology in a way that confused my parents. While other girls my age were reading magazines or watching television, I was teaching myself how computers worked. When I was 14, I checked out a book from the Marble Falls Public Library called Introduction to Programming. It was outdated by at least a decade, but I did not care. I spent that entire summer learning the basics of code writing simple programs on the ancient desktop computer my father had bought secondhand from a garage sale. My parents could not afford to send me to a 4-year university, so I enrolled in community college after high school. I worked as a waitress at a little diner called Rosie's, serving coffee and pancakes to truckers and retirees while taking classes in computer science. It was exhausting. I would finish a double shift with aching feet and sticky hands, then stay up until 2 in the morning studying algorithms and database management. But I never complained because I knew this was temporary. I knew I was building something. After getting my associate degree, I landed a job as a technical support specialist at a small software company in Austin. The pay was modest, just enough to cover rent on a tiny studio apartment and keep gas in my old 2008 Honda Civic. But I was happy. I was independent. And every night after work, I sat at my secondhand desk and worked on a project that I believed would change my life. The project was an app, a personal finance management tool designed for people like my parents, people who lived paycheck to paycheck and needed help understanding where their money went each month. I called it Pennywise because every penny mattered when you were struggling to make ends meet. The interface was simple, the features were intuitive, and I poured every spare hour I had into making it better. I had no idea that this little app created in a cramped studio apartment with secondhand furniture would eventually be worth more than $1 million. And I certainly had no idea that keeping it a secret would one day save my life. I met Derek at a coffee shop called Groundwork in downtown Austin. I was sitting at a corner table with my laptop open working on some updates to Pennywise when a shadow fell across my screen. I looked up and saw a man standing there with a confident smile and a tailored vest that seemed out of place in a casual coffee shop. He was tall, around 6 feet 2 inches, with neatly styled brown hair and the kind of jawline that belonged in a cologne advertisement. Everything about him seemed polished, from his expensive watch to his leather shoes. He asked if he could sit at my table since the cafe was crowded, and I said yes, mostly because I was too surprised to say no. His name was Derek, he told me. He was 36 years old and worked as a sales associate at a luxury car dealership across town. As we talked, he shared his story. His family was wealthy, he said. His father owned a chain of car dealerships in Dallas. But Derek had wanted to prove himself to make his own way in the world without relying on family money. So he had moved to Austin, cut ties with his parents, and started from the bottom. I remember thinking how admirable that was. Here was a man who had been born into privilege but chose to walk away from it. He was not like the spoiled rich kids I had seen in movies. He was different. At least that is what I believed at the time. Derek pursued me with a persistence I had never experienced before. He showed up at the coffee shop every day that week, always managing to find the seat next to mine. He sent flowers to my apartment, handwritten cards expressing how meeting me had changed his perspective on life. He took me to restaurants I could never afford, places with cloth napkins and wine lists and waiters who called you ma'am. On our 5th date, as we walked along the Congress Avenue Bridge watching the bats emerge at sunset, Derek told me he had never met anyone like me. He said I was real unlike the shallow women he had dated before. He said my dedication to my work, to my little app project, showed a depth of character he found irresistible. Looking back now, I wonder if those were the words I needed to hear, rather than the words he actually meant. I had spent my whole life feeling ordinary, and here was this handsome, successful man telling me I was extraordinary. How could I not fall for that? 8 months after we met, Derek proposed. He took me back to that same coffee shop where we first talked, got down on one knee between the tables, and asked me to marry him with a ring that sparkled under the fluorescent lights. I said yes before he even finished the question. My hands were shaking. My heart was racing. I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. My mother had concerns. When I called her to share the news, her congratulations came with a pause that said more than her words. "Honey, do you really know him?" she asked. "You have only been together 8 months. That is not a lot of time." I brushed off her worries. I told her that, when you know, that Derek and I had a connection that transcended time, that she would see once she met him that he was everything I said he was. The wedding was small, held at a rustic ranch outside Austin with about 80 guests. My side was full. My parents, my brother and his wife, aunts and uncles and cousins and friends from work. Derek's side was nearly empty. He explained that his family had not accepted his decision to leave Dallas, that they had essentially disowned him. The few people on his side were co-workers from the dealership men in suits who laughed too loud and made jokes I did not understand. At the reception, my father pulled me aside. He had been watching Derek all evening, studying him the way he studied a leaky pipe, looking for the source of the problem. "He seems charming," my father said carefully. "Just make sure charm is not all he has." I hugged my dad and told him not to worry. Derek loved me. I was sure of it. On our wedding night, Derek held me close and whispered that I was the only person who truly believed in him. I felt special, chosen. I had no idea that feeling would not last. The first 6 months of marriage felt like an extension of our honeymoon. Derek was attentive, affectionate, always ready with a compliment or a kiss. We settled into a routine in our rented apartment in East Austin, a cozy 2-bedroom place with a small balcony overlooking a courtyard. I imagined us building a life there, maybe even raising children someday. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. It started with small comments about my appearance. One evening, as I was getting ready for dinner with some of his co-workers, Derek looked at my outfit and frowned. "You are wearing that?" he asked. "I mean, it is fine, but first impressions matter. Maybe something a little more put together." I looked down at my blouse and slacks, the nicest clothes I owned, and felt a flush of embarrassment creep up my neck. I changed into something else, something I thought he would approve of. He smiled and said I looked much better, and I told myself it was just helpful feedback. He was used to a certain world, a world of luxury cars and wealthy clients. He was just trying to help me fit in. But the comments kept coming. About my hair, which he thought I should style differently. About my makeup, which he thought I should wear more of. About my cooking, which he compared unfavorably to restaurants we could not afford to visit regularly. Each comment was small on its own, a tiny paper cut that barely bled. But paper cuts add up, and soon I was covered in wounds I did not even realize were there. Derek also had very traditional views about household responsibilities. He did not cook ever. He did not clean ever. He did not do laundry or wash dishes or take out the trash. Those were, as he put it, things that wives do. I worked full-time, the same hours he did, sometimes more. But when we both came home exhausted, I was the one who had to make dinner while he sat on the couch watching sports highlights. When I brought this up, trying to be gentle, trying to frame it as a partnership issue rather than a criticism, Derek laughed it off. "My mother did everything for my father," he said. "That is just how it works. You will get used to it." I did not get used to it. But I did stop bringing it up. The financial issues emerged slowly like a stain spreading across white fabric. About 4 months into our marriage, I discovered that Derek had over $30,000 in credit card debt. I found out by accident when a collection notice arrived at our apartment addressed to him. When I asked about it, Derek got defensive, then apologetic, then charming. "It is from before I met you." He explained, his hand on my cheek, his eyes soft and sincere. I was living beyond my means back then, trying to keep up appearances. But I am different now. We will pay it off together. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him because the alternative was admitting that I had made a mistake. So I suggested we create a budget together, a plan to tackle the debt systematically. Derek agreed enthusiastically. He never followed through. His income was unpredictable because it was based on commission from car sales, and his sales numbers were, to put it kindly, inconsistent. Some months he would sell 4 or 5 luxury vehicles and bring home a decent check. Other months he would sell nothing and contribute almost nothing to our household expenses. Gradually, without either of us explicitly acknowledging it, I became the primary breadwinner. My steady salary from the software company paid our rent, our utilities, our groceries. Derek's commission, when it came, went to his credit card minimums and to things he considered essential for his image: a new watch, a designer jacket, shoes that cost more than my entire wardrobe. When I questioned these purchases, Derek had a ready explanation. "I have to look successful to sell success," he said. "Nobody buys a $100,000 car from a guy in cheap clothes." So I stopped buying coffee at cafes and started making it at home. I packed my lunch every day instead of eating out with coworkers. I drove my old Honda even though the air conditioning had stopped working and the check engine light was permanently illuminated. I cut every corner I could think of so that Derek could maintain the illusion of wealth. And through it all, every single night after dinner was made and dishes were washed and Derek was asleep on the couch in front of the television, I sat at my desk and worked on Pennywise. It was the one thing that was truly mine, the one dream I refused to let go of, even as everything else seemed to slip through my fingers. But even that became a source of tension. When I tried to share my progress with Derek, excited about a new feature I had implemented or a problem I had solved, he barely glanced up from his phone. "That is nice, honey," he would say, in a tone that made it clear he did not think it was nice at all. One evening, feeling particularly proud of a breakthrough I had made, I insisted on showing him the latest version of the app. He watched the demo for about 30 seconds before interrupting. "Let me be realistic with you," he said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I was learning to dread. "How many apps actually make money? I mean real money. Maybe you should focus on getting a promotion at your actual job instead of wasting time on this." I felt like I had been slapped, but I kept my composure, swallowed my hurt, and put my laptop away. A few weeks later, Derek came home from a work event talking about Kevin, one of his coworkers. Kevin's wife just got promoted to senior manager at her company, Derek announced, as if sharing exciting news. "She makes 6 figures now. Can you imagine? I could imagine." I imagined quite well. I imagined what it felt like to have a husband who celebrated your achievements instead of using other women's successes as a weapon against you. But I did not say any of that. The loneliness was the hardest part. I could handle the extra housework, the financial stress, even the constant subtle criticism. But the feeling of being alone in my own marriage, of lying next to someone who did not really see me, That was unbearable. I started calling my mother more often, though I never told her the whole truth. I would hint at difficulties, mention that marriage was harder than I expected, and she would offer gentle wisdom without prying too deep. All marriages have rough patches, she would say. The question is whether both people are willing to work through them. I was willing. I was more than willing. But I was beginning to suspect that I was the only one. The second year of our marriage began with Derek losing his job. It happened in January, right after the holiday season when car sales typically slumped. Derek came home one evening looking shell-shocked, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly as he poured himself a drink. "Those idiots fired me," he said, the words coming out sharp and bitter. "After everything I did for that dealership, after all the clients I brought in. I tried to be supportive. I asked what happened, offered to help him update his resume, suggested we look at job listings together. But Derek was not interested in my help. He was interested in finding someone to blame. It was Marcus, he said, referring to his former manager. He had it out for me from day one. And the economy is terrible right now. Nobody is buying cars. And my territory was the worst in the region. They set me up to fail." For 3 months, Derek did not look for another job. He stayed home all day playing video games, watching television, sleeping until noon. When I came home from work, exhausted from a long day, he would be exactly where I had left him that morning, surrounded by empty beer bottles and dirty dishes. I became the sole financial support for our household. I picked up extra hours when I could, took on freelance projects on the side, did everything possible to keep us afloat. Meanwhile, Derek seemed to sink deeper into a fog of resentment and self-pity. When I gently suggested that he might consider taking any job just temporarily just to help with expenses, Derek exploded. "You want me to flip burgers?" he shouted, his face turning red with anger. "Is that what you think of me? I am not some loser who works at a fast food restaurant. I am a professional. I learned to stop making suggestions. I learned to tiptoe around his ego, to phrase everything carefully to make myself smaller so that he could feel bigger. It was exhausting, but it was easier than fighting." Derek's drinking increased during this period. What had been an occasional beer after work became multiple drinks every evening. His moods became unpredictable, swinging from sullen silence to explosive anger with little warning. I found myself constantly on edge, reading his body language the moment I walked through the door, trying to gauge whether this would be a good night or a bad night. It was during this dark period that something unexpected happened, something that would change everything. I was checking my email one evening while Derek snored on the couch when I noticed a message from an address I did not recognize. The subject line read, "Interest in Pennywise Acquisition." I almost deleted it, assuming it was spam. But something made me click. The email was from a woman named Margaret, who identified herself as the founder and managing partner of Horizon Ventures, a technology investment firm based in San Francisco. She explained that her team had discovered Pennywise through an online app development forum where I had posted screenshots months earlier. They were impressed by the design, the functionality, and the potential market. They wanted to set up a meeting to discuss investment or acquisition opportunities. I read the email 3 times, convinced I was hallucinating. This had to be a scam, some kind of elaborate phishing attempt. But I did my research. Horizon Ventures was real. Margaret was real. Her LinkedIn profile showed a successful career in tech investing, with multiple lucrative exits and a reputation for spotting promising startups. My first instinct was to wake Derek up to share this incredible news with my husband. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way he had dismissed my app as a waste of time. Maybe it was the months of criticism and condescension that had worn away my trust. Whatever the reason, I closed the email and decided to wait. The next day, while Derek was still asleep, I responded to Margaret and scheduled a video call for later that week. I would take the call during my lunch break when I could find a private conference room at my office. Derek did not need to know. Not yet. That first call with Margaret lasted over an hour. She was a striking woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She asked detailed questions about Pennywise, about my vision for its future, about the technology behind it. I answered as thoroughly as I could, my heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and terror. At the end of the call, Margaret smiled. "I am going to be honest with you, Nora," she said. "Your app has potential, real potential." Let us talk about next steps. Over the following months, I lived a double life. During the day, I went to my regular job and came home to my unemployed, increasingly bitter husband. At night, after Derek fell asleep, I worked on improving Pennywise based on feedback from Margaret's team. And during stolen moments, lunch breaks, and early mornings and weekends, when Derek was too hungover to notice my absence, I negotiated the deal that would change my life. I opened a separate bank account at a different bank one, where no statements would be mailed to our apartment. I hired a lawyer named Grace Kim, recommended by Margaret to handle the legal aspects of the deal. Grace was a sharp, no-nonsense Korean-American woman in her 40s who had seen every trick in the book and was not impressed by any of them. During our first meeting, I explained my situation honestly. I was married, but I did not want my husband involved in this transaction. Grace listened without judgment. "The app was developed before your marriage," she confirmed, reviewing my documentation. "All the code, all the intellectual property, everything was created using your own resources and your own time, with no contribution from your spouse." "That is correct," I said. "Then under Texas law, this is your separate property," Grace explained. "Any income or proceeds from this property remain your separate property as well. Your husband has no legal claim to any of it." I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I had not even realized I was carrying. As the deal progressed, Derek seemed to spiral further. His comments became crueler, his criticisms sharper. He started making remarks about my weight, about my appearance, about my failure to live up to some standard he had invented in his head. "You have gained weight," he said one evening, looking at me with barely concealed disgust. "No wonder you are always tired." Another time, seemingly out of nowhere, he said, "My college girlfriend was a model, you know. I do not know what I was thinking when I married you. I cried in the bathroom that night, running the water so he would not hear. But even as tears streamed down my face, a part of me felt something shifting inside. The woman who had believed his smooth words in that coffee shop was dying, and someone stronger was being born in her place." 6 months after that first email from Margaret, the deal was finalized. Horizon Ventures acquired 70% of Pennywise for $1.2 million. I retained 30% ownership and was hired as Chief Product Officer with a 6-figure salary. The money was deposited into my separate account, protected by layers of legal documentation that Grace had meticulously prepared. I was a millionaire, and my husband had absolutely no idea. The discovery happened on a Thursday night in October. Derek had gone out saying he was meeting a former coworker to discuss a potential job opportunity. He had been saying this a lot lately, these vague meetings that never seemed to produce any actual job offers. I had stopped asking questions because the answers were always the same. About an hour after he left, I noticed his phone on the kitchen counter. He had forgotten it in his rush to leave. The screen lit up with a notification, and then another, and then a steady stream of messages that made the phone buzz repeatedly against the granite. I tried to ignore it. I really did. But something in my gut, some instinct I had been suppressing for too long, told me to look. Derek's password was his birthday. I had known this for years. My hands shook as I entered the numbers and watched the screen unlock. The messages were from someone saved in his contacts as just the letter J. The preview showed words that made my stomach drop. Words like, "miss you" and "cannot wait" and "tonight." I opened the conversation and began to scroll. There were hundreds of messages stretching back over a year. The woman's name, I learned, was Jessica. She worked as a receptionist at the car dealership where Derek used to be employed. Their relationship had begun long before Derek lost his job, long before we had even celebrated our first anniversary. The messages were explicit in ways I do not need to describe, but worse than the physical betrayal were the emotional ones. Derek had shared things with this woman that he never shared with me. He had complained about me, mocked me, painted me as a burden he was forced to endure. "She is so boring," he had written. "You are everything she is not. I am only staying because I do not have anywhere else to go right now, he said in another message, and then the one that cut deepest. Once I get half of whatever she has, I am out. Then we can finally be together. I sat on the kitchen floor for a long time, the phone clutched in my hands, my world collapsing around me. Everything I had believed about my marriage, about my husband, about myself, all of it was a lie. Derek did not love me. I was not sure he ever had. I was just a placeholder, a meal ticket, a stepping stone to something he considered better. But even through the pain, through the rage and the grief and the crushing sense of betrayal, one thought rose above all others. He has no idea what I am worth. He has no idea what he is about to lose. With trembling fingers, I screenshotted every message, every incriminating word Derek had ever sent to Jessica. I emailed them to myself, then deleted the evidence of my actions from his phone. I placed the device back on the counter exactly where he had left it. When Derek came home 2 hours later, smelling like perfume that was not mine, I was sitting on the couch reading a book. He glanced at his phone, seeming relieved to find it where he had left it, and went straight to bed without a word. I waited until his breathing slowed into the rhythm of sleep. Then I went to my laptop and drafted an email to Grace Kim. 2 days later, Derek sat me down in the living room. His expression was serious, almost theatrical, like he had rehearsed this moment in front of a mirror. "I want a divorce," he announced. "I have wasted enough years on this marriage." I looked at him, this man I had once loved, this man who had convinced me I was special before systematically tearing me apart, and I felt something I had not expected: calm. Can I ask why I said keeping my voice neutral? Derek sighed as if he was doing me a favor by explaining. "Let us face it, Nora, I could do so much better than a woman like you. You are average at best. I deserve someone who matches my potential." The irony was so thick I almost laughed. Here was an unemployed man living off his wife's income, telling her she was not good enough for him. It would have been funny if it was not so pathetic. Derek laid out his demands. He wanted half of everything. The apartment contents, such as they were, the car I had bought with my own money, our savings, which were almost entirely my contributions since he had not worked in almost a year. He had already consulted a lawyer, he said proudly, a real shark named Bradley Shaw who specialized in high-asset divorce cases. "I will take you to court if I have to," Derek threatened. "My lawyer says I am entitled to half of whatever we accumulated during the marriage." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I stood up and collected my keys. "We will see about that," I said. Derek smirked clearly, believing he had won. He had no idea the battle had not even begun. My phone call with Grace that evening was brief and focused. I updated her on Derek's demands on his lawyer on the timeline he had proposed. "He thinks you have nothing." Grace said, a hint of amusement in her professional tone. "He thinks I have a few $1,000s in savings and a used Honda." I confirmed. "Perfect," Grace said. "Let us keep it that way until the hearing. The look on his face will be worth every penny of my fees." I moved out of the apartment within a week, telling Derek I was staying with a friend while we worked out the details. In reality, I had signed a lease on a beautiful 2-bedroom in Westlake, a neighborhood Derek could never afford. I did not give him my new address. Meanwhile, Derek's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He called me constantly, leaving messages that alternated between threatening and pleading. He told mutual friends that I had abandoned him, that I was mentally unstable, that he was the victim in all of this. He even called my mother, trying to turn her against me. Mom called me afterward, worried and confused. "He said you were having some kind of breakdown," she said, "that you just walked out with no explanation." "Mom," I said, taking a deep breath, "I need you to trust me. I cannot explain everything right now, but I promise you I am fine. Better than fine, actually. Derek is not who we thought he was." My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I never liked him anyway." I laughed for the first time in weeks. Derek's lawyer, Bradley Shaw, lived up to his reputation as a shark. He sent aggressive letters demanding full financial disclosure, threatening to drag the proceedings out for years if I did not comply. Grace responded with documentation showing our joint assets were minimal: a shared checking account with a few $1,000s, furniture that was mostly secondhand, an old car that had been purchased before the marriage. Derek, through Bradley, demanded to see my personal bank accounts. Grace pushed back, citing privacy concerns and the absence of any evidence that I had significant assets. When Bradley subpoenaed my tax returns, Grace produced returns that showed my modest salary from my day job. The Pennywise income structured through the acquisition deal had not yet appeared on any tax documents. Derek thought I was hiding a few $1,000s. He had no idea the real number had 6 zeros after it. The morning of the hearing dawned bright and clear, one of those perfect Texas spring days that made you believe anything was possible. Travis County Family Court was a severe-looking building, downtown, all concrete and right angles. I had driven past it dozens of times without ever imagining I would walk through its doors. But here I was, wearing a fitted navy suit. Grace had helped me pick out my hair professionally, styled my chin held high. Derek was already there when I arrived, sitting at a table on the other side of the courtroom with Bradley Shaw. He was wearing a new suit, one I had never seen before, and suspected he had charged to a credit card he could not afford to pay. Jessica was sitting in the gallery behind him, trying to look supportive. I recognized her immediately from her photos on Derek's phone. Derek glanced at me as I took my seat beside Grace, and I saw a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He had expected me to look defeated. Instead, I looked like a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. Judge Patricia Holloway presided over the proceedings. She was in her 60s with silver hair and a stern expression that suggested she had seen every possible variation of human folly and was not impressed by any of it. Her reputation, Grace had told me, was for fairness and a particular intolerance for dishonesty. Bradley Shaw opened with a predictable narrative. He painted Derek as a devoted husband who had sacrificed his career to support his wife's ambitions. He claimed Derek had given up lucrative opportunities to be present in the marriage, and now that the marriage was ending, he deserved to be compensated for his sacrifices. I watched the judge's face as Bradley spoke. Her expression remained neutral, but I noticed her pen had stopped moving. She was not writing any of this down. Bradley finished by reiterating Derek's demand: half of all marital assets plus spousal support given Derek's current unemployment. Grace stood up. "Your Honor?" She said, her voice calm and confident. "I would like to call a witness." Bradley objected, claiming he had not been notified of any witness. Grace produced documentation showing the witness had been properly disclosed, just buried deep in a pile of paperwork that Bradley apparently had not read carefully. Judge Holloway allowed the witness to proceed. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened and Margaret walked in. Derek turned to look, confusion evident on his face. He had never met Margaret, never even heard her name mentioned in our household. He had no idea who this elegant, powerful-looking woman was or why she was relevant to his divorce case. Margaret took the witness stand and was sworn in. Grace walked her through her credentials, her role at Horizon Ventures, and her company's investment activities. "Can you describe how you became aware of the application known as Pennywise?" Grace asked. Margaret explained how her team had discovered the app, how they had evaluated its potential, and how they had reached out to its creator. "And who is the creator of Pennywise?" Grace asked. Margaret pointed at me. "Nora Williams. She developed the application entirely on her own, beginning approximately 2 years before she was married." Bradley objected again, asking what this had to do with the divorce proceedings. Judge Holloway overruled him. Grace produced documentation, time-stamped code repositories showing my work on Pennywise dating back to well before I met Derek, bank records showing the separate account I had opened, the acquisition agreement signed and notarized detailing the sale of 70% of Pennywise to Horizon Ventures. For how much, Grace asked Margaret. $1.2 million, Margaret replied. The courtroom went silent. Derek's face drained of color. Bradley Shaw's mouth fell open, his shark instincts momentarily paralyzed by shock. Grace was not finished. She introduced the evidence I had gathered from Derek's phone, the messages with Jessica, the timeline of the affair, and most damningly the message where Derek explicitly stated his intention to take half of whatever I had and then leave. The messages were displayed on a screen for the entire courtroom to see. Jessica in the gallery looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. Derek sat frozen, unable to speak, unable to move, unable to do anything but watch his carefully constructed lies collapse around him. Judge Holloway reviewed the evidence in silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold. "Mr. Shaw," she said, "your client filed for divorce claiming he deserved half of marital assets based on his contributions to the marriage. The evidence before me shows that your client contributed almost nothing financially engaged in a prolonged extramarital affair and explicitly admitted to planning to defraud his spouse." She turned to Derek, her gaze withering. "Sir, the only reason I am not referring this matter for criminal investigation is because stupidity is not illegal. But let me be clear about what is going to happen here. Judge Holloway's ruling was devastating for Derek. Pennywise and all income derived from it was confirmed as my separate property under Texas law. Derek had no claim to any portion of the $1.2 million or my ongoing salary. The minimal joint assets, a few $1,000s and some furniture, would be split evenly. Derek was ordered to vacate our former apartment within 30 days. And because of his documented bad faith behavior, Derek was ordered to pay the entirety of both parties' legal fees. As the judge delivered her verdict, I watched Derek's face transform. The arrogance was gone. The smugness was gone. What remained was the expression of a man who had just realized he had gambled everything on a losing hand. I stood up to leave the courtroom. As I passed Derek's table, I paused. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with something that might have been shock or despair or the beginnings of belated understanding. "You were right about one thing, Derek," I said quietly. "You could do better. The problem is, so could I." And I walked out of the courtroom without looking back. The aftermath of the hearing spread faster than I expected. Austin's tech and legal communities were small enough that juicy gossip traveled quickly. A blogger who covered local court cases had been in the gallery and published an article that same evening. The headline was something like "Local Tech Entrepreneur Turns Tables on Greedy X in Epic Courtroom Reveal." Within days, the story had been picked up by larger outlets, shared on social media, discussed in online forums. People I had not spoken to in years reached out to congratulate me. Strangers sent messages of support. The hashtag #MillionDollarDivorce trended locally for almost a week. For Derek, the exposure was catastrophic. The luxury car dealerships in Austin, the ones where he had hoped to eventually find work again, wanted nothing to do with him. His name had become synonymous with greed and foolishness, a cautionary tale told at networking events. The image he had spent years cultivating, the successful, sophisticated professional, was shattered beyond repair. Jessica left him almost immediately after the hearing. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she had confronted Derek outside the courthouse. "You told me you were going to be rich," she reportedly said. "You told me she had money and you were going to take it. You lied to me too." The irony was not lost on me. Derek had lied to everyone, including the woman he was lying with. Abandoned by his mistress and his prospects, Derek had no choice but to crawl back to Dallas. The parents he claimed had disowned him turned out to be very much in his life. They had simply refused to continue funding his extravagant lifestyle, which Derek had reinterpreted as abandonment. They took him back, though I imagined it was not a triumphant homecoming. Meanwhile, my life transformed in ways I had only dreamed about. I moved into my new apartment in Westlake properly, finally able to decorate it the way I wanted without worrying about criticism or judgment. I hung artwork that I loved. I bought furniture that was comfortable rather than impressive. I adopted a cat from a local rescue, a gray tabby with green eyes who I named Pixel. He curled up on my lap while I worked and purred like a small engine. My job at Pennywise was everything I had hoped it would be. Margaret became not just a business partner, but a mentor guiding me through the complexities of tech leadership with patience and wisdom. The app launched officially and received positive reviews. Users praised its simplicity and usefulness, exactly the qualities I had prioritized when building it alone in my studio apartment all those years ago. I hired a small team, deliberately seeking out people who had faced financial struggles in their own lives, single mothers returning to the workforce, recent immigrants with valuable skills but limited connections, young people from backgrounds like mine, full of potential but lacking opportunity. Giving them chances felt like honoring my own journey. My mother came to visit the following month. She walked through my apartment with wide eyes touching the soft throw blankets and the plants on the windowsill. "I always knew you were special," she said, tears forming in her eyes. But I had no idea how much. We hugged for a long time. I realized that I had spent years trying to prove my worth to a man who would never see it, when the people who actually mattered had believed in me all along. Marcus called to congratulate me properly once the news had fully spread. So he said, in his typical big brother fashion, "Can I borrow some money?" We both laughed. The kind of deep, releasing laughter that comes after a long ordeal has finally ended. The healing did not happen all at once. There were nights, especially in the beginning, when I lay awake replaying conversations with Derek. Moments when his criticisms echoed in my head, when I caught myself scrutinizing my reflection for the flaws he had pointed out. The damage he had done went deeper than I initially realized, like cracks in a foundation that are not visible until you start rebuilding. I started seeing a therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Sandra, who specialized in helping people recover from emotionally abusive relationships. In her quiet office with its soft lighting and comfortable chairs, I learned to recognize what had really happened during my marriage. "You were not hiding the acquisition from Derek to deceive him," Dr. Sandra told me during one session. "You were protecting yourself. Your instincts knew he was dangerous even before your conscious mind accepted it." This reframing helped more than I can express. I had carried guilt about keeping Pennywise's secret, worrying that it made me as dishonest as Derek. But protecting yourself from someone who means you harm is not the same as deceiving someone who loves you. One is survival. The other is betrayal. There is a world of difference. Through therapy, I also learned to recognize the red flags I had missed or dismissed during my relationship with Derek. The way he love bombed me in the beginning, showering me with attention and affection to create a sense of obligation. The way he isolated me from concerns, dismissing my mother's worries as interference. The way he gradually escalated his criticism, testing my boundaries, seeing how much I would accept. The way he made me feel responsible for his emotions, his career failures, his unhappiness. I wrote about these realizations in a journal documenting my journey from the naive young woman who had said yes in that coffee shop to the person I was becoming. Reading back through the entries, I could see my own growth mapped out in black ink. The woman at the end of the journal was someone the woman at the beginning would barely recognize. 1 year after the divorce was finalized, I stood on the balcony of my apartment and watched the sun set over Austin. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink and purple, the kind of sunset that makes you believe in beauty even after experiencing ugliness. I thought about Derek briefly. I wondered if he ever thought about me, if he ever regretted what he had done. But the wondering was detached, clinical, like reading about a stranger's life in a newspaper. He did not occupy space in my heart anymore. He was just a chapter in a book I was still writing, important for what it taught me, but not for who he was. I no longer felt anger toward him. Anger, I had learned, was a rope that kept you tied to the person who hurt you. As long as you were angry, they were still present, still influential, still controlling some part of your emotional life. Letting go of anger was not about forgiving Derek. It was about freeing myself. What remained was gratitude. Gratitude for the strength I discovered I had. Gratitude for the people Grace and Margaret and Dr. Sandra and my family who supported me when I needed it. Gratitude for Pennywise, the little dream I refused to abandon, even when the person closest to me told me it was worthless. Gratitude for this new life, hard-won and precious. A year has passed since I walked out of that courtroom. 12 months of healing, growing, becoming. I do not know what the future holds. Maybe I will fall in love again someday. Maybe I will not. Maybe Pennywise will become a household name. Maybe it will be acquired by a larger company, and I will move on to new challenges. The uncertainty used to frighten me. Now it feels like freedom. What I know for certain is this. My worth was never determined by Derek's opinion of it. His inability to see my value said everything about his limitations and nothing about mine. The people who try to dim your light are usually afraid of their own darkness. They want to bring you down to a level where they feel comfortable, where your potential does not threaten their mediocrity. I learned that protecting yourself is not the same as being dishonest. Sometimes silence is survival. Sometimes keeping parts of yourself hidden from someone who would use them against you is the wisest thing you can do. Trust is earned, not owed, and someone who has shown you they do not deserve your trust does not deserve your secrets either. Success, I realized, is not the best revenge. I used to fantasize about Derek seeing my accomplishments and feeling regret, but that fantasy lost its power the moment I stopped caring what he thought. The best outcome is not making your enemies jealous. It is becoming so complete in yourself that their opinion, good or bad, simply does not matter anymore. If you are in a situation where someone makes you feel small, where you hide parts of yourself just to keep the peace, where you have started to believe the cruel things they say about you, please know this. You deserve more. The strength you need is already inside you, waiting for the moment you are brave enough to use it. Walking away is not weakness. It is one of the hardest, bravest things a person can do. I do not know who needs to hear this today. Maybe it is you. Maybe you are in the middle of your own story, trapped in a chapter that feels like it will never end. But chapters do end. Pages turn. And sometimes, what looks like an ending is actually the beginning of something better than you ever imagined. My name is Nora. I am 35 years old now. I live in Austin, Texas, with a gray tabby cat named Pixel and a career I built with my own 2 hands. I was married to a man who thought I was average at best. He was wrong, and proving him wrong in front of a judge and a courtroom full of witnesses was worth more than any $1 million. But you know what is worth even more, standing on my balcony watching another beautiful sunset, knowing that I finally learned to love myself, knowing that no one can ever take that away from me, knowing that the hardest journey led me exactly where I needed to be, and that my friends is worth everything. Thank you for listening to my story. I would love to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who should have believed in you? How did you prove them wrong? Drop your experience in the comments below. I read every single one, and your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button. It helps more than you know. Subscribe if you have not already, and share this video with someone who might need a reminder that they are stronger than they think. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next story. I am wishing you the courage to walk away from what dims your light and toward everything that helps you shine. Until next time, take care of yourselves and remember you are worth so much more than anyone who cannot see your value.